Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt coming to you from a catacomb buried deep beneath the New World Order still. Tonight we're going to chat a little bit about a topic that some might say fools rush in where angels fear to tread. I'm talking about sexual harassment. I'm starting to smell a rat. I know a lot of other people are. When it comes to the mainstream media's newfound moral outrage over sexual misconduct in America. I mean, it's just a bit rich, isn't it? Coming from the amen corner of the very sexual revolutionaries who developed our super duper hypersexualized culture of death in the first place. I mean, Anderson Cooper, very outraged about Judge Roy Moore's proclivities, is just a little silly. So it seems like when it suits their purposes, they feign this sort of pre-sexual revolution indignation for post-sexual revolution behavior, if that makes sense. Now, I'd like to think that an unwanted sexual advance in 2017 is just as traumatizing as one that was made in 1957, but somehow I don't think that it is after all these years. After they have spent decades assaulting whole generations of kids in public schools with every manner of perverse sexual indoctrination, after they've turned movies and TV into degenerate peep shows and sodomitical training lessons, they've all but destroyed Christian marriage. They've redefined the family to include relationships condemned by both Scripture and every civilization in history. They've turned high schools and college campuses into meat markets where the hookup culture and the friends with privileges thing is now par for the course. I mean, really, where is this indignation coming from? I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a restaurant, Rob, during prom season, you know, and you see the young kids come in for the little meal, I guess the pre-intercourse, dinner that they have or whatever.
I think that's what they call it.
I think that's what it is, yeah. I mean, holy cow. It looks like Friday night on the 14th Street corridor in Washington, D.C. And I really start to feel sorry for the ladies of the evening, Rob. I mean, how do they even distinguish themselves from... Yeah, I don't know how they do it. How do they distinguish themselves from the high schoolers? It's just so sad, but that's the reality. And that's what happens after rampant contraception, shacking up is fine, public obscenity, not a big deal. And we got it all. Free sex, free love, marriage now is for, losers, old-fashioned people. Sex before marriage, even with multiple partners, well, that's all right, that's cool. And yet somehow now, when the gods of the media decide that it's time to be outraged, we're all supposed to pretend like it's 1958. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Matt Lauer or Al Frankenstein, Garrison Keillor. That was a big surprise, wasn't it? That Al Franken has had a few problems. I mean, what did they think was going on? This is like, the old Casablanca, Louis Reynal in Casablanca. He's outraged to discover that gambling in Rick's place.
How can he close me up? On what ground?
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
You're winning, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Everybody out at once.
Of course, I'm not denying that misconduct is going on. Of course it is. And I'm certainly not trying to excuse this behavior. But this is the behavior of the barbarians. And once again, in our series of the traditionalists seemed like maybe they were right all along, once again, traditional Catholics were warning 50 years ago that unless society returns to some moral sanity and goes back to the laws of God and nature, barbarism is unavoidable. It's inevitable. Well, folks, that's what we're looking at. Barbarism. This is what happens when a society decides that degeneracy is progress. And that's what we've got. All those people as benighted folks in the past, back in the 50s, they were just confused and puritanical and sexually repressed and everything else. We've progressed. We're progressive now. This is the culture that the sexual revolution created. This is the bed that it made for us, forgive the pun. And it's everywhere. They're making movies about this stuff in Hollywood, major Hollywood films that glamorize the very thing that Anderson Cooper is all upset about on CNN every night. 50 Shades of Grey. Rob, there's a good one, I'm sure. Yeah. 50 Shades of Grey, all about evidently a man in a position of power seducing a young college student and then engaging in every manner of perversion and abusive behavior, including plying her with drugs and alcohol, I guess, to get what he needs to have happen. Now, we went after 50 Shades of Grey when it first came out over at the Remnant newspaper. Our friends at LifeSite News went after 50 Shades of Grey, but most people just ignored it. Just another movie. With the ladies at The View, have you ever actually sat through an episode of The View?
I try not to, really hard.
Can't imagine doing it.
Yeah.
But I did Google it to see what their reaction was. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. They're waxing rhapsodic about how sexy it all is and how we all need to run out and catch 50 Shades of Grey. Ellen, who's become apparently, Rob, everybody's favorite family daytime personality. She's horrible. I don't know when this happened, but she certainly is popular. Anyway, she did sort of a funny and dramatic reading of 50 Shades of Grey, and I just looked it up tonight. 10 million views on YouTube. Amazon UK announced that 50 Shades of Grey had sold more copies than it had than the entire Harry Potter series combined, making E.L. James, the author of 50 Shades of Grey, it's Amazon's best-selling author, replacing J.K. Rowling. Did you know that?
I did not.
It's unbelievable. And this is the sort of thing that we're now reading about how terrible it is going on in real life. Okay, so when a pig like Matt Lauer says, well, gee, he's looking at 50 Shades of Grey, looking at popularity of all that. No, he's a pig, sure. But when he looks at all that and he says, I guess the chicks sort of dig this sort of thing. I guess society accepts it, so watch me go. I'm going to give it a crack. I mean, why would we be surprised by this?
Right.
Now, again, I want to really emphasize this. I'm not excusing the men involved in this piggish behavior. But I'm trying to maybe get to the real problem, to the root of the problem, I guess, which is the degenerate culture our God-rejecting society has built on the rotting corpse of this sexual revolution, which is now about 50 years old. That, the sexual revolution, that is the context of all of this. But nobody wants to talk about that. The real problem with the war on women is that we are throwing our sisters and our daughters into combat zones, not just in the world's battlefields now, but everywhere, including in the workplace and everywhere else. But of course, it's sexist to talk about protecting women from all that rot. It's misogynist to make the point of maybe not swearing or acting like a buffoon or a degenerate around women. You can't say that anymore. And God forbid, you can't speak approvingly of the pedestals men used to build for their wives and daughters in a better time, in a more sane time. Going back to chivalry and all that rot that we like to make fun of now. You see, we've rejected the very idea that women have a singularly cultivating and civilizing influence over men. That's a sexist thing to say. And that influence that they have by their nature, given to them by God, empowers them over men in ways that the feminist movement long since rejected. And that's the problem. Women want to be treated just like men. And the moral chaos all around us now is a consequence of that blurring of the lines of distinction between the sexes. So what do? They tore down women. They sexualized men. They're perverting kids. They really had a movement. Now, again, 50 years old, a movement to get women out of the home. Remember traditional Catholics were talking about that? Is that a great idea? Take women out of their homes? Why? Because it was a gender-appropriate role, and that's sexist. We must get rid of that in the big grand kindergarten called the New World Order. Get them on contraception. Get them so they can behave just like men. That's what the drive was. Let someone else raise their kids. Dress them up just like a man or dress them up just like a streetwalker. It didn't matter so long as they didn't look or act like mothers anymore. So do you think that maybe the early traditional Catholics, you think that maybe they had a point when they argued that modesty in dress and attitude is important because it protects women, because it preserves the purity of men and maintains a civilized society? Might they just have had a tiny little point there that was worth considering basically that attitude was 1,000 years old or more, and it had supported families and individuals and societies for a millennium? I mean, whatever happened to the conversation about modesty? I know, no one wants to talk about that. But gee, now when you see where things are going sexually and morally in society, maybe we should revisit it. Because why are men behaving like pigs? Maybe it's because women are behaving like men who have been deprived of the civilizing feminine influence in society completely. But see, that's a sexist thing to say, right? That women had that power, that influence over society. But they did. And not just the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. That's very true too. They got rid of that as well. But also in the sense that women had they exercised a power over men that was significant. I was watching Fox News the other night, for example, and maybe Rob can throw some of this up on the screen, but I just thought it was so ironic. You had the ladies on the Greg Gutfeld show They were talking about some of these sex scandals involving Moore and Al Franken and all the rest. And I just thought their attire was rather ironic. No irony there, right? Where exactly? Let's just break this down for a second. Let's be big kids for a moment. Greg Gutfeld, the host of that program, where exactly is he supposed to look when he's talking to these ladies that have their long legs exposed and flopping all over the set over at Fox News? I mean, is he supposed to pretend not to notice that? And if he does notice, is that sexual harassment? It's an impossible situation. Doesn't this objectify women? Does anybody believe there's some producer that's going, hey, ladies, you know what? Trust me, it's your brains, not your legs that the folks want to see. And how demeaning is that for the ladies? Is this what feminism has brought us? You got to run around in your undies in order to become successful on television? Really? Nobody has a problem with that? I mean, how ridiculous is it to think that here in our progressive, brave new world, we're supposed to pretend that none of this matters? Men are supposed to develop some sort of subhuman, superhuman skill set that allows them to override the reproductive hardwiring in their own bodies? I mean, lots of luck with that. But folks, that's what we're talking about here. This is what custody of the eyes. Remember that old expression from grade school, Catholic school? You had to learn to practice custody of the eyes. And why was that? Why was that? It's because Holy Mother Church recognized that men are visual, especially men, women too, but especially men. You can see that by the number of strip clubs in a big city are geared towards men. Men are more visual, right? I think that's part of human nature. That's the way it is. So especially men are visual human beings who can and are led into evil thoughts, into sinful inclinations, and all sorts of things that they'd rather not do, but who are led that way by members of the opposite sex, women, who display and project sexuality like that. This is not my opinion. This is human nature. This is the way we're hardwired. You know, I guess we're supposed to forget about that, pretend like it doesn't exist. And men, on the other hand, were also taught that they had to respect women. You see, it wasn't a one-way street. It was a two-way street. And men who would treat women badly or who would objectify them or sexualize them or treat them as sex objects were guilty of mortal sins, according to Mother Church, worthy of hell, deserving of hell, if they behaved that way towards women. It went both ways. But see, in a sane and in a Christian society, men and women, they knew how to cooperate. And it was a beautiful thing. Were there problems? Were there sinners? Sure. But look what we've got now. In the past, they knew how to cooperate and to lovingly look out for each other, to understand the weaknesses and the strengths of the opposite sex, the complementarity of the sexes, as they call it now. They understood this. They were taught this by their mothers and grandmothers in schools and so forth in a sane society. Protecting each other according to the strengths that God has given to each one of us and according to our gender. This is what's going on. And now, of course, it's spilling into gender ideology and everything else. But this is all part of the sexual revolution, which is a dehumanizing, demonic assault, not only on morality, but on humanity. That's what's happening to us. And back in the day, women understood this, and they dressed with dignity and in a way that encourages men to behave well. Is that really such a terrible thing to say? That women had that power? And people say, oh, whoa, so the man couldn't behave well on his own? You know what? Maybe not. Maybe women had just that much power and still do. And isn't that, after all, precisely what feminism was supposed to be all about? Empowering women to keep men on the right track. Well, we had it figured out for 1,000 years. It's only since feminism, false feminism, got busy that everything has gone off the track. Now, I get it. This conversation is something that our benighted society, the society that embraces Bruce Jenner, is no longer capable of having. We don't speak the same language anymore. It's impossible to criticize what's going on in the mainstream from a Catholic point of view. We can try, but don't expect many satisfactory results. Fine. We're not talking to the mainstream right now. We're talking to ourselves, to each other. What about Catholics? What about so-called traditional Catholics, conservative Catholics? Have we forgotten what the church has to say about all of this, especially modesty and dress? Is it really such a goofy thing that I know I'm going to get blasted from people who watch this video for trotting out antiquated notions that are misogynist and sexist and really just so out of date. How about Our Lady of Fatima? She's pretty popular here in the 100th anniversary. A lot of the conservative traditional Catholics like to talk about her, right? Well, what about what she said about modesty? Why is that something that can just be dismissed? Was Our Lady of Fatima just being some extreme nitwit when she prophesied to little Jacinta Marto, now Saint Jacinta, that certain fashions, quote, certain fashions will be introduced that will offend our Lord very much, and that more souls would go to hell because of sins of impurity than for any other reason? I mean, how could fashions become any more offensive to our Lord than they are today? So we have to assume that maybe, just maybe, Our Lady was talking about us, about our generation. Maybe. The other day I talked to a young man who attends arguably the second most conservative sort of neo-Catholic university in the country. But he told me that the single most difficult aspect of being a young traditional Catholic man on that campus is the total lack of modesty in dress. Pajamas to class, swimwear to mass, short shorts to breakfast. It's just that ridiculous. And really nice, beautiful kids going to mass, going to their prayers and trying to be good. And I'm not blaming the kids. It's just that the culture, has reached everywhere now, including onto some very Catholic college campuses. And again, people say, well, the kid that told you that, he needs to get a hold of himself. He needs to grow up. He's got problems. Really? Well, can't we use the same argument then to some of those ladies who are saying they heard things from bosses that was sexually, intimidating, sexual harassment? He said something to them that was sexually harassing. Now he needs to lose his job. Well, what about this young man on campus? All he's trying to do is go to class, spending a lot of money trying to go to class, be a good kid, and his eyes are being assaulted, sexually assaulted, by the way people are dressing. Doesn't he have any rights? It's all his fault that he, a young man with hormones racing, is distracted by a total lack of modesty and dress on campus. Think what you want, but it's a fair point to kind of give the kid a hearing. And to blame him is certainly not what our grandmothers would have done. They believed it was a gross violation of Christian charity 50, 60, 70 years ago for women to run around half naked. That's what the standards of modesty and dress given to us by the church were acknowledging, in fact. That the human body reacts as it should, often before the will is even involved. You see, that's part of our hardwiring. And it has to do with the propagation of the species. It has to do with how human beings work and how they procreate. It's all part of the hardwiring. And it's very, very possible to mess that hardwiring up. Wise men have known this. The church has known this. Many different faiths and philosophers have acknowledged this. It's possible to mess it up, both in the individual and in the society in general or as a whole. And that is precisely what we've got going on. Shorting out hardwire, sexual hardwire, all across the board, with millions of people and in society and everywhere else, workplaces everywhere. And no moral code, no moral authority to even try to fix it or to correct the problem, because that would be sexist. This is what the Catholic Church was teaching, by the way, up until the Second Vatican Council. Pope Pius XII, I hope you're not going to dismiss him as some kind of Puritan, prudish church lady guy. He's a church man, Rob. He's a pope, but not a church lady. Here's what he had to say. He had many things to say. Google it if you're interested in this topic, but here's something interesting. He says, quote, "How many young girls there are who do not see any wrongdoing in following certain shameless styles like so many sheep. They certainly would blush if they could guess the impression that they make and the feelings that they evoke in those who see them. What sins are committed or provoked by conversations which are too free, by immodest shows, by dangerous reading. How lax have consciences become, how pagan have the morals become," end quote. This was 1954. And Pius XII directed the bishops at that time throughout the whole world to, quote, "take actions against this most serious plague of immodest fashions," end quote. Plague of immodest fashions, he calls it. And he repeated at that time what Pope Pius XI had done in 1930 with his special instruction to the bishops of the world, directing that the Roman standards of modesty in dress, which were called the Mary-like standards of modesty, be followed throughout the whole world. Now, why did they do this? Were these popes insane? Were they Puritans? Were they goofballs? Are we who live in 2017 somehow impervious to the inclinations, to the sins of the flesh, against which these great popes, and by the way, the Mother of God, were trying to warn the world? You can look up these Mary-like standards of modesty. It's the Mary-like standards of modesty online if you want. I'm not going to go into it here because this is a ticklish conversation, and I'm not a priest, and there's always the danger of scrupulosity when it comes to this question. So if it's not addressed in the proper form and in the proper authority, and this isn't it, and I'm not the proper authority. I'm just trying to, again, bring this conversation back. Let's have the conversation again. Let's, with men's clubs or priests out there, ladies' guilds, whatever. Let's bring it back. Let's look at some of the authorities from 50, 60 years ago in the church, because now I think that we see where it all led. It's easier to have the conversation about what they were talking about when they tried to save us from where we are now. My point, again, is certainly not to tell everyone how to dress or anything else, but the problem is this issue is not being addressed, and I think we're paying the price for it. And this is something we actually could, by the way, do something about. But first we have to have a conversation about it. Is it important? Is there a causal effect between what's going on with modesty, for example, and the sexual explosion and sexual harassment and everything else that we see every night on TV and the news? It can be difficult to make big changes in the world, but it can't be all that difficult for Catholic schools, for example, Catholic universities, Catholic colleges, to just go back at least to some semblance of a modest dress code on campus. I mean, my old alma mater, Christendom College, Go Crusaders, they have a dress code out there. They encourage modesty. Now, should we laugh and just mock at Christendom for being a silly little liberal arts college that's just so antiquated and silly and sort of cute and quaint, and precious? Or do we say, hey, they made an effort. They made an effort to avoid the sexually charged atmosphere that now dominates the workplaces in America, schools, entertainment, everywhere, even the halls of government now. But it wasn't that long ago, and what I'm saying here tonight would have just struck everyone as a statement of the patently obvious. Now it's crazy talk, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. That means that maybe we're getting a little confused. And what does it say about us if we think it's crazy? Just go back and watch an old baseball game with Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig or Joe DiMaggio or whatever, and look in the stands and look how the people dressed just a few years ago. All the guys are in jackets and hats and ties, and women are in beautiful skirts and all that. Are we really so all fired up certain that they were wrong and that we are right, that we got it right, while we run around in our birthday suits, aborting millions of babies and trying to figure out when we're going to have our next sex change operation? Those people in the past that dressed and behaved in a civilized Christian fashion, they were the nutters? Not so sure. Whom the gods would destroy, they obviously would first make mad. I'm Michael Matt for the Remnant Underground. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.